Chapter 33 to 34. I let out a small sigh as I looked over a report from ANBU about Orochimaru's possible movements that had arrived on my desk overnight, the report detailing some odd happenings going on within the land of sea, most likely the same thing that happened in the filler of the show, and made a note for ANBU to investigate it further. A knock on the door drew my attention away from the report. "Enter," I called out to the Naki. "Hokage-sama," Inoichi greeted with a smile as he entered the room, respectfully closing the door behind him as he entered. "I'm here with a report on Tsunade-sama's progress." I blinked before nodding, setting the report aside before activating the soundproofing and anti-surveillance seals built within the walls. "So, how bad is the damage?" I questioned, preparing myself mentally for the report. "Well, like with all psychological issues, there is never going to be a complete cure," he reminded me, pulling out a notepad and flipped it open. "It will take months of therapy before I think she'll be ready to operate on someone without flinching from the blood, and dealing with her issues of loss will take even longer, but her mental foundations, while eroded from years of alcoholism and gambling addictions, are still stable enough for her to eventually be able to return to active duty if she wishes to." I nodded slowly in response. "And what is it you have told her?" I prompted him to continue. "I told her she is going to have to stop drinking if she wishes for any real progress with therapy," Inoichi replied with a shake of her head. As you would expect, she was not very open to that. Even if she is a medical genius, addictions are hard things to kick. But she didn't deny it outright, so I will take a victory where I can. I let out a sigh as I rubbed my face. There are definitely several options with Shinobi that ended up like Tsunade, leaving aside the therapy jutsu that Naruto-kun had used on her in the original timeline. The first, and easiest, is to remove her from the core and disavow her as a Konoha shinobi. Even with the political fallout, it would still be the easiest option, as it would allow them to place specially designed seals to keep her from working with any enemies of Konoha. But it was also a waste of potential resources that she could bring forth, such as her medical knowledge and skill. Second was a rather brutal method. We could essentially break down every bit that was Tsunade Senju until only a shell remained and rebuild the remains into a loyal shinobi of Konoha. Pretty much what Danzo did in Root, and with certain individuals, such as useful psychopaths or sociopaths. The issue with that plan would be the loss of what made Tsunade such a brilliant medic in the first place, and her ability to do anything but fighting or healing, including teaching. Not to mention it would devastate Hiruzen-sama and Jiraiya-sama to see her in such a state as well. Finally, there was the most time-extensive option, but also the most humane option, putting her through therapy, which wasn't a guarantee that it would work. After all, therapy was a two-way street. The therapist could do all they can do, but if the patient didn't make the effort to follow through, then nothing would change. But, hey, wouldn't be the first long-shot gamble I made. "Keep it up with the therapy," I told him. "Remind her that if she really does want to take charge of the hospital and start training medical ninja, that she will have to drop her drinking. I will not have a drunk ruining either the place where we recover and mend our injured, or ruining the people who do so." Inoichi nodded. "As you wish, Hokage-sama," he replied easily. "I'll do my level best to make sure she'll get on the right track." "Thank you, Inoichi," I told him gratefully as I dropped the seals. "Here's hoping she follows through with it." Inoichi nodded with a smile as he left the office, stepping to the side as Jiraiya strolled in as soon as he opened the door. "Hello, Jiraiya-sama," I greeted him with a smile as the Sannin walked in, Inoichi excusing himself. "How did things go?" "Fair to middling," the Toad Sage sighed as he leaned against the wall next to the windows. On the plus side, all of Orochimaru's bases in the land of rice paddies, including the one used as the official base for Otogekure, have been destroyed, and all the shinobi who were manning them are either dead or captured. The Fuma clan of the land of rice paddies has also come along. That is good news. I nodded. That's on the plus side. What about the negative side? I had to kill the next heir to the Fuma clan, Erasure, who had gone mad and used one of Orochimaru's crazy kenjutsu to merge with two of his dead subordinates. Jiraiya-sama answered heavily. Although he had, like me, walked through an ocean of blood in his time as shinobi, that didn't mean he liked to kill. The new heir, or rather, heiress, is a girl called Sasami, and she's pretty down in the dumps about it because Erasure was her cousin. She also refuses to talk to me unless it's absolutely necessary. Understandable. I sighed. Sasami had been inconsolable in the anime, but hadn't blamed Naruto-kun for it. Have her sent to me at some point so I can explain things to her and maybe introduce her to Naruto-kun. She could use a friend. Anything else on the bad news front? All of the bases were abandoned, the old ninja said grimly. For all intents and purposes, Orochimaru left the lower-ranking Otogekyure personnel to whatever fate we chose to deal out. He took all of his experiments, higher-ranking personnel and his notes and fled. Looks as if it happened right about the same time the invasion happened, maybe a couple of days afterwards at most. As cautious and sneaky as ever. I grumbled. Well, it was a long shot, after all, so eliminating those bases will prevent him from reusing them in the long run at least. Good work, Jiraiya-sama. How many Fuma clan members came along? Everyone that was left in the clan, so about 75 or so. The Toad Sage rubbed his headband thoughtfully. Plus a few former Otogekyure members who had become missing ninja and had joined up with the Fuma. That makes it almost 90. That made my eyebrows shoot up. The only Fuma clan members that I had seen in the original timeline had been the bandit faction and the 4 idiots who had been the most powerful members of the clan and had been tricked by Orochimaru. That had been less than 20 people. I guess I'd never seen the non-combatants though, so that might account for it. Have their leaders sent to see me at some point and will thrash out an agreement for the integration of the Fuma into the shinobi forces and assign them housing in the clan residential district. I said, internally wincing at the paperwork I had just landed myself. I can see some of the clans grumbling about that. Jiraiya-sama observed. Mostly the ones who are smaller than the Fuma. I snorted. They may not be the clan that invented the Fuma shuriken, but tell me Jiraiya-sama, did you have to put effort into fighting Erashur and the other members of the Fuma that were Orochimaru's supporters? Yep. That curse mandala jutsu of theirs that Erashur used was a pain in the butt to get out of. Jiraiya snorted. If I hadn't been warned about it by Hanzaki, it may have come close to killing me. One of them, who I saved using some nifty medical jutsu that Tsunade taught me, has a technique called Antlion Ninja Arts, Ephemeral. It's definitely a kinjutsu due to the fact that the user is on the edge of death after using it, but it had me on the ropes for a few minutes. Add in the supplementary techniques that they used to track me down and throw in some remedial lessons in using the Academy 3 and I think they'd be very formidable. There you have it. Any clan that can train a member or members that makes one of the Sannin take them even slightly seriously is an asset to Konoha. I said firmly. More strength for Konoha, a safe harbor for the Fuma clan and less power for Orochimaru. Win-win-win, I say. I agree, the old shinobi grinned before becoming serious. What did Inoichi have to say about Tsunade? That she needs to cut back on the booze. I said bluntly. She's using it as a crutch to numb herself against the pain. As long as she's using that, she won't try to move forward. A few cups is fine, but drinking several jugs a night is ridiculous. Any kind of persuasive power you can bring to bear would be appreciated, Jiraiya-sama. For all the good it'll do, I try, the Toad Sage snorted. Tsunade's always marched to her own drummer, going her way or no way. Getting Sensei to talk to her would help more. I don't want to impose on Hiruzen-sama. He's retired, for the second time, and he deserves some peace and quiet. I said firmly. He's already doing some major good by taking Sasuke-kun as an apprentice and I don't want to push him on that. The leaf owes him too much for me to impose on him. Seriously, he'd led Konoha through the second half of the Second Great Shinobi War after the death of the second Hokage, the entirety of the Third Great Shinobi War, and all the years of peace between and since, aside from the few, too short, years of his successor, Minato-sama. Inoki had reigned for longer, but the sheer level of respect and practical worship that the citizens of Konoha had for Hiruzen-sama was incredible. Add in my own level of respect for him, led me to the decision that Hiruzen-sama's retirement was to be a permanent one. Although, there was also a medical reason for my decision to ensure his retirement was a permanent one. He was old, plain and simple, one of the oldest shinobi around, he was nearly 70 years old, and his use of chakra, while mitigated by advances with medical techniques, still took their toll on him. While he still had at least a decade left in him, if he kept to his retirement, pushing himself further would only shorten that time span. He deserved his retirement, something that he never got a chance to do in canon. Shaking my head I let out a small sigh. But, if the two done up crossing paths in the village and talking, not like I can stop them, I commented with a wry grin, getting a chuckle out of the Sannin. Thank you for taking care of the investigation for me, I told him gratefully smiling at the Sannin. That was the only matter that I needed your help with for the time being. Glad to be of help. Now then. The Toad Sage's face turned somewhat lecherous. Time to get down to doing my research. Rolling my eyes at the older man's bad habits, I waved him out. Chuckling slightly to myself I leaned back into my seat, despite my complaints when it was first brought up, I was getting used to being the Hokage. In the end, it really wasn't that different from running a clan, just a larger scale in comparison. And now, we were reaching to point of the time skip from the original series to the Shippuden series. Which also means that Akatsuki was going to start making moves soon enough. With that in mind, I stood up. "Chika-chan, anything else on the planner for today?" I questioned my teammate, who poked her head in the room in response. "Nothing else major," she informed with a shrug. "Going to do some training?" "Yeah, drop the kunai if something comes up," I confirmed with a nod. "Will do, good luck." With a flash, I vanished to the training grounds. Letting out a sigh, I looked around and looked at a training ground that had opened up after becoming the Hokage. Training ground XX Hokage use only LVL requirement, 90 plus. This training field contains numerous chakra mutated creatures vying for dominance. Be warned, when entered, your life will be at risk. Are you sure you wish to enter? Y/N. I took in a careful breath as I began mentally bracing myself. This was not my first time entering this training ground, and honestly, calling it a war zone would be sugar-coating it. The training ground was warped by the chakra of the beasts within it. Hell, there were even some places where gravity just didn't work. And said beasts, well, they were no joke. If the seals that held them within the training ground were to somehow fail, which shouldn't be possible considering the seals themselves are within a subdimensional pocket, then they stood a strong chance of leveling Konoha as they continued to fight each other. While they weren't on the level of the Bijou, it was a damn near thing. Hitting the Y, I was brought into a desolate wasteland as was immediately forced to dodge out of the way of a bolt of lightning as a massive beast with short, bristling purple fur, looking like it was nothing but pure muscle and rage with two massive horns roared out in the face of a white, insectal dragon-like creature that let out a stream of white fire like chakra in response to the roar. Behemoth, the apocalyptic beast HP, 900,000 CP 100,000. Xenojiva, the newborn elder HP, 750,000 CP 250,000. Fuck, I mumbled as I flicked a tri-pronged kunai a good distance away before triggering Hiration as the two beasts began to clash against one another. Looking around, I could see my target goal in the distance, a massive crystalline outcropping in the distance. I had no idea if the area boss was around it, but hey, worth checking out. A shadow appeared overhead as I let out a groan. Of course, Big Purple Rage Beast decided to fuck everything and summon a meteor to wreak everyone's day. My power surged as I felt my chakra ripple. Opening my eyes, I looked up at the meteor and held out a hand towards it. Shinra Tensei, heavenly subjugation of the omnipresent god. My chakra rippled before surging out into the meteor, the ball of rock crushing beneath the power of my Rinnegan, reducing it to mere rubble as the two creatures turned their attention to me. Oh, should have thought that one through, as they now perceived me as another threat to the territory they were fighting over. Letting out a sigh as I dodged out of the way of a blast of lightning from the behemoth, I quickly lashed out with my Kodachi, cutting across the snout of the Xenojiva as it moved to bite down on me. In any other place, I would have assumed either of these two to be the area boss, but, well, the thing was, they weren't. Despite their ridiculous strength, neither of them were the area boss. Letting out a TSK, I moved as the Xenojiva blasted at me with its beam attack before summoning a spike of earth under it, spearing it in the gut as it was sent reeling from the attack, the behemoth moving in to try and grab at me while I was distracted only for my Kodachi to light up with Chakra Flow, Chakra Scalpel, as I slashed out at him, cutting through the muscles in its paw. The behemoth howled in pain and rage as it recoiled, glaring balefully at me as a wind began to pick up around me. I let my power shift as I brought forth a different path, before my arms seemed to shift and change, forming a barrel as mechanical parts appeared in my body as the Azura path flowed through my body. Moving out of the way of the tornado that was forming, I fired the Azura attack through the neck of the behemoth, cutting it clean off with shocking ease. Blinking, I switched the path, filling my body as I made a trio of hand seals. Summoning Rinnegan. I placed a hand on the ground as a plume of smoke erupted around me. And then the Xenojiva found itself being charged by a large two-headed dog with the purple eyes of the Rinnegan and black rods embedded in its body. The beast snarled as it began chomping on one of the wings of the insectal dragon, tearing into the thin membrane of the wings as the Xenojiva roared in pain before blasting out with its beam, slicing its way down the dog's body, splitting it in two, causing it to slump a bit before the point where it had been split, and quickly grew out in a rapid regeneration, leaving two dogs standing there, hale and hearty. The Xenojiva roared out in confusion as it tried to make some distance by flapping its wings, only for the tattered remains of its wings to spasm painfully as the two dogs leapt on it, dragging it to the ground as they savagely began ripping into the dragon as it let out one final shriek before it was silenced. Once the beast was dead, I dismissed the two dogs back to the summon realm as I turned away and began walking, checking the notification as I moved. You have defeated Behemoth and Xenojiva. 93,000 EXP gained. Behemoth horns and Xenojiva hide looted and stored in the inventory. Closing the window, I continue to move towards the center of the area, doing my best to skirt the various territorial disputes going on with the denizens. My first trip into this training zone had been one giant wake-up call, given that I nearly died several times to the always fighting creatures. Each and every one of them was an alpha predator worthy enough to be an area boss in almost any possible dungeon and field dungeon in the world. All of them possessed strength enough that any one of them could likely give any boss summon a run for its money. Makes me wonder how strong the area boss was, considering aloft the creatures avoided the central area like one would avoid the plague. I paused as suddenly, I felt a small tremor ran through the earth beneath my feet. A tremor that was repeated after a couple of seconds. Looking around for the source, I sent a pulse of chakra through the grounds, sensing for the origin of the disturbances. My gaze turned to the mass of crystal in the center of the training ground. My eyes widened as the crystal began to shift and move. That is not a mountain, I stated to myself in a shocked tone as it began to rise, a pair of downright massive wings spreading out as an ear-piercing roar was let loose, forcing me to cover my ears from the sheer pitch of it, even at the distance I was away from it. Emperor of Beasts, the Silver Dragon God. Kurash HP, 2 million CP, 1,500,000. By the Kami. I breathed out as the beast flapped its wings, nearly knocking me over from the rush of air rushing towards me from the mere act. How did they even seal something like that? I quickly activated my Sharingan to get a better look at the creature, memorizing its entire appearance. Appearance-wise, the entire creature took the form of a dragon with the clear, silver light pulsing out of the crystals as they jutted out at odd angles from all across its body, pushing through the silvery scales that covered it. I could see Kurash looking around briefly before its startling blue eyes settled on me as they narrowed. Well, no hiding from this fight it looks like. Blinking, I felt the familiar rush of power fill me as I activated my Rinnegan once more. Reaching out with my chakra, several new presences appeared around me as I activated Yamatsu Hisame, 8 hags of the underworld, and summoned versions of myself from seconds within the past. Out of every power that my Rinnegan gave me, or even any other ability I have, this was my most useful technique, as the Yurikos I summoned didn't disappear after a single hit, had access to my full power when I summoned them. They could each use a different path of the Rinnegan, not to mention allowed for us to share our vision. We didn't even glance at one another as we charged forward, each of us knowing our own roles as Kurash roared at us, volume deafening us for a bit as he took flight. The wind produced from the flaps of his wings halted our movement for a moment as he gained altitude. My animal path quickly formed a set of seals before summoning the Rinnegan Crow, a massive 3-legged crow with a pitch-black coloration and flames leaking from its mouth as the group of us jumped onto its back as it took to the air after Kurash. Next to me, the Azura Path formed her arm into a large mechanical chakra cannon as she began to aim at the dragon before firing a massive beam of chakra. We easily tracked its progress, seconds before one of the crystals on its body lit up and began absorbing the chakra at an insane rate. How troublesome, the Azura Path stated with a frown. Indeed, is there a limit? The Animal Path questioned. Perhaps, might be best to avoid or break the crystals, the Petra Path suggested. Test the theory, I commanded as I used the Deva Path to begin levitating in the air. Use Elemental Chakra to see if it has any effect. Understood, the Outer Path nodded in agreement as she began to form hand seals. Fire release, Hellfire Inferno. We all watched the effects of the fire on Kurash, somewhat effective it seems, as it absorbed some of the chakra, but most of the flames left scorch marks on the scales surrounding the crystal, its HP only being whittled down by a measly dozen. Minimal damage, the Preta Path reported. We will need to separate to ensure we all don't get taken out, Azura Path pointed out. Jump onto Kurash, Animal Path instructed. I will catch those who fall. Setting up Hiratian Kunai, Human Path informed us as she began to pull out the tri-pronged kunai. Boarding Kurash, Naraka Path called out as she leapt out onto the body of the dragon, managing to keep stable footing on the scales without her chakra being absorbed, different paths jumping onto different parts of its body. The dragon roared in response as it began to buck and rock, trying to knock the paths off its body as they tried to break past the dragon's scales, but the beast's scales were far tougher than even chakra-reinforced steel. Its defenses are resilient to physical attacks as well. Our chakra scalpel is unable to pierce past its scales in addition. A sigh escaped my lips as I heard their reports. Clear off the body, I announced. I will attempt to force it to the ground. The other paths vanished back onto the summoned bird as Kurash spun in a final attempt to knock them off its back as I gather my chakra. Shinra Tensei, heavenly subjugation of the omnipresent god. I roared out as I channeled a large amount of my chakra into the technique, the gravity force slamming into Kurash hard enough to shake him as I continued to push more chakra into the Deva path and its unique technique. The dragon roared as it forced its head towards me before inhaling, my teeth gritting as I realized it was about to expel its chakra beam at me, only for one of my Hirashin Kanai to appear before me as the Preta path appeared in front of me, thrusting their hands out to absorb the chakra from the dragon's chakra beam. The path was able to absorb a part of the beam before its body began to burn and was wiped away from existence, but it bought enough time for me to teleport out of the way. Panting a bit, I looked down at Kurash, who was looking back at me with baleful eyes as it flapped its wings to regain the altitude it lost. Using my Yamatsu Hisame, 8 Hags of the Underworld, once again to summon a new Preta path back on the animal path's crow. HP has barely dropped, the Azura path commented with an annoyed tone. Same with the CP, the human path added. Looks like we're in for the long haul with this one, I said with a sigh. Continue with actions, we can't run now. Kurash roared in anger as it was smashed into the ground by another, Shinra Tensei, heavenly subjugation of the omnipresent god. I was panting as it crashed, my paths quickly moving in on the ground to attack the dragon whose wings were battered and broken. It had taken me at least 24 hours to get to this point, and he was still around 1 million points of health. A rumbling sound came from the dragon as it swept its tail around, forcing my paths to back away from it or get smashed. By the kami. I panted out. What does it take to kill you? There was another similar rumbling sound as Kurash turned its gaze to look up at me with a grin on its face, making me realize that it was laughing at me. My teeth gritting together in anger at the fact that this overgrown lizard was laughing at me. Oh, go fuck yourself. I cursed it as I placed my hands together and began channeling Yin and Yang chakra together, the other path's eyes widening in shock as they quickly made some more distance from the dragon. Yin Yang release, annihilation of the heavens. I shouted out angrily as a ball of black chakra formed in front of me before it cracked on the surface facing Kurash before blasting out in a beam of chakra that slammed into Kurash, making the dragon roar out in pain as it was thrown to the ground once again. The Preta path appeared behind me with a quick teleport before pulling us both to the ground before I completely collapsed. Once we were on the ground, the path started channeling chakra into my body to restore my depleted reserves. That injured him more, Azura path noted. Can't continue with that attack, however. Human path grimaced. What else can we use? Animal path questioned. One more thing, I stated as I stood up, the ground rumbling as the dragon began to rise up as well, a massive amount of scarring on its face as it turned to glare at us. By time, I will begin using Chibaku Tensei, heavenly body bursting from the earth. The paths looked at each other before nodding in unison. That will work, they agreed. Rinnegan summoning, the animal path summoned forth a massive white tiger with black stripes along its body that immediately began to charge Kurash, who let out a deafening roar in challenge to the creature. I closed my eyes as I began to channel chakra between my hands, condensing the gravity in the area into a small singular point as a black sphere began to form. Azura path leapt off of the back of the summoned tiger as both of her arms began to shift into enlarged cannons while Preta path had her hands on the Azura path's back. The blast from the combined paths carved into the ground before slamming into the flank of Kurash, knocking it off balance enough for the tiger to pounce, clamping its jaws around the dragon's neck. My focus was absolute, as I continued to channel chakra into the sphere before me, the gravity within the sphere growing denser and denser as I began to aim it above Kurash. The human path appeared on the opposite side of the dragon of the Azura and Preta paths, forming several hand seals before slamming her hands into the ground. Earth release, grand tectonic movement, she declared before the area around Kurash began to splinter and rock, throwing the dragon further off balance as it was pitched onto its side, the human path teleporting out of the way before she was crushed underneath. Denser, the gravity within the sphere had to be denser or Kurash would never be caught up within it, the aim had to be perfect. Earth release, stone prison, the outer and Naraka paths shouted in unison as stone chains erupted from the ground, wrapping themselves around the dragon before thick bars of stone rose up and closed themselves over top of the dragon. A rumbling was heard before the dragon unleashed a violent roar into the air, actually sending the tiger on its throat and the chains around its body to go flying from the sheer pressure produced from the roar. Its tail then lashed out around itself, smashing through the stone bars as it turned its gaze to the paths around it as it inhaled. The blast of chakra it exhaled was unlike any that were seen before, blinding a couple of the paths from its brilliance shortly before it wiped them from the face of existence, with only the Azura and outer paths managing to escape in time. It was ready. Chibaku Tensei, heavenly body bursting from the earth. I announced as the sphere of gravity was launched above the dragon, Kurorashi's eyes following it for a moment dismissively before they widened in shock at the sight of the sphere as the chakra casing containing it dissolved. The entire training ground rocked in protest before everything began to get lifted into the sphere, Kurorashi roaring as it struggled against it. The only thing keeping me and my remaining two paths on the ground was the fact that I was using a part of my power to produce a gravity field around us as the rest of the training ground was slowly being lifted and pulled to the sphere. Several of the creatures nearby being pulled along with Kurorashi as it flapped its broken wings in an attempt to break free of the technique, several large boulders slamming into its body forcing it off balance and sending it closer towards the sphere. The two remaining paths shared a look before nodding, dashing out of the protective circle to allow themselves to be caught up in the gravity, aiming themselves at Kurorashi. Chakra flared through their bodies as they enhanced themselves beyond my own limits, uncaring of any injuries they gained as a result, overcharging the jutsu they were channeling. Earth release, Earth Dragon Devastation. Fire release, Great Flame Dragon Extermination. The two jutsus launched at Kurorashi, taking the form of eastern dragons with serpentine bodies wrapped around the dragon as it fought against the techniques as my remaining two paths faded. The final nail in Kurorashi's coffin was when it impacted against the dense sphere of gravity, the beast roaring as it began to be buried in the rubbed flying at the sphere, growing in size before a moon-size rock with an entrapped Kurorashi as its core floated above me. Letting one last gasp, I released the technique, feeling myself stagger from chakra exhaustion as I suddenly found myself back at the entrance to the training grounds with a pop-up before me. Congratulations, you have defeated Kurorashi in the final training ground. 500,000 EXP gained, 5x pure chakra crystals, 3x Kurorashi scales, 2x Kurorashi bones and 4x Kurorashi fangs looted and stored within your inventory. For defeating Kurorashi you have been granted a one-time use summoning scroll to summon Kurorashi to fight by your side in battle. You have gained a level. Well, fuck, that was actually useful. I blinked at the pop-up for a moment before a chuckle overcame me, one that quickly dissolved into laughter as I shook my head and looked up at the sky, seeing the sun had only moved a little bit from its position when I left. Just so you are aware, time is accelerated within that training ground, it had to be for that boss fight. I snorted in response. Thanks, I told my friend as I began to make my way home, my body stiff and sore from over 24 hours of constant fighting against a goddamn dragon the size of a mountain. Upside though, I now had the perfect weapon again, Madara, other than myself. Let's see you top this, Madara. Hey, Tsunade-san is looking to speak with you, Yuriko. Aoi called out to me as he entered my office. Looking up, I raised an eyebrow at my teammate. Yeah. What is she looking to speak with me about? I asked him. Aoi shrugged in response. Something about the changes you made to the medicine curriculum for the academy, he replied casually. She looked pissed about it too. I let out a sigh as I rubbed my forehead. I knew this was coming, and I still wasn't looking forward to it. Alright, let her in, I told him. Before she decides to just smash my door down. Aoi snorted in response. Alright, good luck, he replied before stepping out of the room, the stomping feet of Tsunade heard soon after as she stormed into my office. What the hell is the meaning of this? She shouted at me angrily. I met her angry gaze with an impassive one as I quickly took in the person who could have been the fifth Hokage and found her looking far healthier than when I had last seen her. It seemed that she was keeping to her sobriety plan, which was good. And by this, I assume you mean my removal of your rules to the lessons? I questioned evenly in response. Of course. Are you wanting all your medics to be killed? Tsunade demanded of me with an angry scowl as she slammed her hands on my desk, my eyes flicking to the cracks that formed in the wood. Do be careful of the desk, I noted before meeting her gaze as she fumed even more. Tsunade-san, while your rules would work with support medics, not every medic is a support medic, especially when only a handful every generation can meet your exacting requirements for the creation rebirth, strength of 100, technique, which is one of your little rules if memory serves. Only one who has mastered this jutsu may ignore the 3 preceding rules, isn't it? Because if they don't, then how can they heal their allies if they're dead? Tsunade retorted angrily. How can we heal our allies if our allies are dead from our inaction? I countered, my eyes flashing with anger for the first time before I calmed myself. Sometimes, the best way to heal our allies is by ensuring that they don't need to be healed in the first place. The two of us glared at each other for several moments. Tsunade-san, there is a reason we medics have developed our own taijutsu. If we medics aren't to fight, then why even bother learning how to in the first place? I questioned evenly. Not all of us believe that your way is the best way, hence why your rules, I spat the word out with a scowl. That you decided on yourself with no input from anyone else, are best suited for the support medics who are regulated to the rear lines. How dare you? Tsunade growled angrily as she pressed down on my desk, leaning in an attempt to intimidate me. How dare you? I countered back with a scowl of my own as I rose up to meet her gaze. Okay, how did it come to this? I asked myself as I found myself in a standard training ground, across from Tsunade who was cracking her knuckles in preparation for our bout. Oh yeah, we're both stubborn, quick to anger and have temper issues. I let out a small sigh as I took up a stance, not really seeing a need to draw my sword or use my Sharingan. Tsunade let out a growl as she leapt at me, her fist cocked back as she went in for a haymaker, obviously wanting to end this quickly to put me in my place. Even without my enhanced eyesight, I was easily able to move out of the way with ease of her strike before striking back at her with a pair of hard blows to her abdomen before I backed out of the way of her backhand as she tried to put some distance between us. Distance that I wasn't about to allow her as I shot in close, slamming my fist into her abdomen again, forcing her to cough out in pain as she swung at me again with a haymaker. It's quite obvious why you need the Genesis Rebirth technique if this is how you have always fought, I commented with a disappointed tone as I swayed out of the way of her blows again. Your attacks are painfully easy to predict. I grabbed her outstretched wrist and quickly threw her over my shoulder, throwing her into the ground. Your guard is non-existent, and you can't even move out of the way of my blows. Tsunade's anger was palpable as she rose up from the ground, glaring angrily at me. Just keep running your mouth, she growled at me. We'll see how well you can when I land a punch on your face. I let out a sigh of disappointment as I dodged another haymaker and smashed my own fist into her face. I could feel the cartilage of her nose breaking beneath my fist as she was thrown back a bit. I didn't even give her a chance to recover as I slipped into a modified, strong fist stance that I picked up from my time sparring with Guy and hammered my fist several times into her sternum, forcing the air out of her. As she crashed into the ground, she looked up, her eyes widening as she saw my heel descending down upon her in an axe kick that smashed into her shoulder, a cracking sound echoing through the training ground as bones broke. Letting out a sigh, I took a step back from Tsunade, who let out a groan of pain. So, do you think I should remain on the back lines because I chose to specialize Iryujitsu? I questioned in a bored tone. Your rules work for you, not everyone else. I refuse to allow the talent of any medics under my command to be wasted because of the rules that you decided to put upon them. I turned and began to walk away. Do not forget that I am the Hokage of this village. You lost that chance by running away from your problems. I didn't bother to look back as I stalked out of the training ground, doing my best to ignore the slight sob that escaped from the Sanin's throat. It didn't feel good, having to do that to the woman, but it needed to be done. Hopefully this would break her out of the box that she restrained herself and others in with those rules of hers. It was an odd thing for him to be doing this, Orochimaru concluded as he pondered recent events as he adjusted his robes around himself, especially since he was reaching out to every minor nation along with the Kumogakure as a part of a conference to discuss the alliance of 4 of the 5 great nations. Really, it should be simple to manipulate them all into attacking Konohagakure and assist him with raising it to the ground, even if it did take him half a year to convince all of these nations to come together for this meeting, using Kabuto as a middleman for all of the discussions to convince them all. The only one left out was AIM, and that was because it was under the thumb of the Akatsuki, and he wasn't quite ready to deal with them quite yet. Now all that was left to do was to pluck their strings, play on their fears, and then point them at Konohagakure. Stepping out of his room for this little conference, he began to make his way towards the meeting hall, a smirk playing over his features as he strolled forward, entering into the hall where the gathered shinobi were waiting for him, their eyes locking onto him as he entered. Greetings to you all, he greeted with false cheer as he smiled at them, meeting the gaze of the Raikage who had the Two-Tails Jinchuriki behind him. Thank you all for agreeing to this little conference. Just get to the point, Orochimaru, a shinobi from the land of mountains growled as he narrowed his eyes at the snake Sannin. Orochimaru shrugged his impertinence off as he gave the group of shinobi, representing 20 different villages altogether. Simple, it is these alliances that Konohagakure is building, he informed smoothly. And the threat that their Godame poses to all of us. Orochimaru put a look of concern on his face as he began to pace in front of the shinobi. While with Hiruzen in charge of Konohagakure, we all could rest easily due to his passive nature, he told them all carefully. With their new Hokage, however, with Yuriko Uchiha at the lead of this village, and at the lead of the alliance with 4 of the 5 great shinobi nations, something that has never been seen before, I fear we are looking at the beginning of an aggressive expansion, and unable to act before it is too late. The various shinobi began to mutter amongst themselves as A simply remained stoic, not budging his gaze from Orochimaru. And what exactly are you suggesting then? The lead shinobi from Kusagakure questioned, his eyes narrowed at Orochimaru in suspicion. What I am suggesting, my friends, is that with our combined power, we can match the allied strength of this great nation alliance, and rise up and take their places, Orochimaru informed with a dramatic flair. As it stands right now, the alliance only has about 3 usable Jinchuriki, which, will so have, one of their Jinchuriki is too young for battle, another is simply uncontrollable and can be turned on them, and the final, has ran away from his village. He could see the shinobi listening to his words, leaning in as he plucked at their strings. And not to mention, the fact that out of those 3 usable Jinchuriki, 1 is an inexperienced child, when we have at least 3 Jonin-level Jinchuriki, 2 of which have managed to gain complete control over the beast's chakra. Several of the shinobi turned to look at the two-tailed Jinchuriki who remained as stone-faced as her superior. And with this allied group, we could crush this alliance in a single swoop, Orochimaru explained, seeing the shinobi being swayed to his side, although A's stone-facedness was a bit concerning. If we eliminate Konohagakure first and kill their vaunted Hokage, it would throw their allies into disarray, and allow us to kill them at our leisure. Because, that worked so well for you last time, Orochimaru, a feminine voice commented, getting a frown onto Orochimaru's face as he turned to face the speaker only to freeze, alongside every other shinobi in the room, at the sight of a woman sitting in the front row of the circular room, right in front of dozens of eyes. Yuriko Uchiha. I smirked as I saw several expressions flash across Orochimaru's face, and the face of every shinobi around me. Really, you should have put up a better defense than you have. My little brother could sneak in here wearing neon orange and you would be none the wiser, I taunted, keeping my posture relaxed, even as everyone else in the room tensed up. I mean, really, you didn't think we wouldn't realize that this meeting was happening? You're not as subtle as you think, Orochimaru. Yuriko Uchiha, Orochimaru hissed out, forcing a smile onto his face. Well, I must say, thank you for coming here and proving my point. You feel threatened by all of us. I raised my eyebrow at him in response. Not really, the reason I am here is twofold, I told him with a smirk. One is, you put yourself into the open, and we still want your head, that much is obvious. 2. We are not an exclusive alliance, I could hear a couple of gasps from the crowd. If you wanted to be a part of this alliance we are building, then you simply had to come to us, and ask, chances are, we would agree to you joining us. And, why would we do that, when we could simply kill you now, and parade your body for all to see? Orochimaru questioned. You are powerful, but against this many Kage-leveled opponents, you think you stand a chance of victory? I let out a chuckle in response. Perhaps all of you together might be able to kill me, might, I replied. But, I can guarantee you, there will only be a handful of survivors. The question you must ask yourselves, who wishes to die first? With that, I began to unleash my own killing intent, keeping my relaxed pose and smirk firmly in place as the gathered shinobi began to shift about nervously. To their credit, none of them passed out, or stopped breathing in fear. That is what I thought, I said as I dropped my intent after a few moments. A snort drew my attention to A and his bodyguard Yujito. So tell me, Hokage, A drawled with a dismissive look. How is that little brother of that clan killer of your doing, has he killed any of his clan yet? I twitched slightly in response, my smirk dropping as I met A's gaze. And how about your weapon? Have you ever told him the truth about why you took him in? I frowned in response. I would choose your next words very carefully, A-san, I told him in a low and cold tone as several of the shinobi near me began to move away from where I was sitting. It's not like your own hands are clean, how did that plan of yours to get the Byakugan go again? I could hear his teeth grinding from where I was sitting as he glared at me. I knew it was his predecessor who gave the order for the assault, but it was the one who was attempting to manage the fallout from the attempt. I could see Yujito snarl in response, a purple aura beginning to surround her as she called upon the Nibi's chakra. Then she made a mistake. She met my gaze squarely as my Manjikyu Sharingan flashed, and just like that, the Bija chakra vanished. What? She questioned, looking down at her own hands. Foolish child, I chided her lightly. Just because I don't like using the technique that Madara used doesn't mean that I won't. Don't worry though, she's just going to be asleep for a month. Yujito's eyes were shaking as she turned her horrified gaze to me as he clenched his fist tightly. Now, as I was saying, any of you are free to approach us about joining our alliance, I told the crowd as I stood up, brushing some invisible dust off of my shoulder as I did so. But for now. I turned my gaze to where Orochimaru had been standing and frowned when I saw he was nowhere in sight. I have a snake to hunt down and skin. With those words I spun on my heel and began walking away, showing my back to each and every shinobi in the room, a declaration of my own confidence in my ability to kill anyone who dared to attack me, no matter the situation. Life in Kumogakure was considered to be a harsh one, as while their village was near unassailable with its position high in the mountains and covered by clouds, this meant they had no fertile fields to grow food of their own, nor pastures to raise livestock of their own, resulting in them importing everything. Of course, this also meant that they need a viable source of income, which, as shinobi, was obvious, pushing them to do better, and better as the demand for services grew. As a result, they were used to harshness, tight belts and hard work. What they were not used to, however, was the bellowing roar of their Raikage as a smashed desk was ejected from his office with the force of a cannon and flew over the village before crashing into a training field that was thankfully empty at the time. Fucking bitch. I shouted, panting slightly from exertion as he stood over where his desk had been. After a moment of seething he threw himself into his chair and leveled a look at Yujito. Anything? The blonde Jinchuriki shook her head. Nothing, she's just sleeping, nothing I do is waking her up, she replied, looking shaken as she hugged herself a bit. I can't even feel her chakra within me, it's like she isn't even there. I thought it only worked on the Nine Tails, we only heard about the Kyuubi being controlled. I ground his teeth together as he glared at the wall across from him in anger. Obviously, we should have taken that into consideration, considering the Kyuubi is considered to be the strongest of the Bijou, he commented, his chair's arm creaking as his grip on it tightened. A woman in the corner sighed as she shook her head. "Sama, you really need to get your temper under control," Mabui sighed as she noted the damages, which were normally regulated to his desk. "Last thing we need is you bringing the building down around us." I shot his secretary a glare that she didn't flinch from before turning away. "She didn't react like anything we predicted," he commented with a frown on his face. "She's supposed to be highly protective of her family, right? Then why didn't she lose her cool like we wanted her to?" "Probably because she knew that was what you wanted," Mabui countered. "Yuriko Uchiha isn't exactly a stranger to manipulation or politics, and all the reports we got of her overreactions were when she was still a child, even if she was a jonin at the time. Now because of her show of power, the smaller villages are flocking to Konohagakura's alliance," Ace snarled as he gripped his chair tighter. "Then perhaps it's time to set that pride of yours aside, bro," a new voice inputted as they turned to the window to look at a burly man with 8 swords on his body. "Yo, here's the master of fate, the wielder of 8, Killer B, WIRD. There were groans of irritation from both Yujito and Mabui as they frowned heavily at his brother. "And what does that mean, B?" he questioned dangerously, one hand flexing as he readied himself to use his famous Iron Claw technique on his brother for the nth time. "The facts are the facts, the Uchiha lady is powerful, yeah?" Killer B prompted. "And we're losing fans as it stands. So, swallow that pride, and extend that hand." A frowned as he began deciphering his brother's unique way of talking. "What, join their alliance?" he questioned after he got B's point. "Go crawling to them begging for scraps?" No, big bro." B waved his hands hastily, reading the signs of an impending Iron Claw. "It's like this, you dig? We go in now, as equals or we're left out in the cold. It's best to go now and be bold." "Fool, you fool, Kumo already got a bad rap from your old man, bro wake up, it ain't like you to be so slow." "He has a point, I can't believe I just said that," Mabui informed, muttered the last point to herself as she rubbed her forehead. "It isn't us begging for scraps if we go now, it's us acknowledging their strength. However, if we wait, we are going to lose contracts to this alliance as they grow in power, and need I remind you, we have no farmers. No farmers, no food, no work, no trade. Not even mentioning, due to the fact we don't even have food production, we're not exactly self-sustainable," Yujito reminded. "Hell, the entire country relies on trade for foodstuffs as a whole, and I don't think the daimyo is going to continue to sink money into us if we're not making any of our own like we have been." The Raikage growled as he was assailed by logic and hard facts from every direction. It was the least favorite part of the job, in his opinion. Give him an enemy he could smash in the face any day of the week rather than politicking. I paused as he ran over what he had just thought and a smile grew over his face as an idea occurred to him. "There is a way for us to save some face, perhaps," he commented with a grin. "I challenge Yuriko Uchiha to a match for her to prove herself to me." 3 sets of eyes looked at him with varying emotions between them. "That seems like a terrible idea. That is definitely something you would think of." "Yo, let's do it." A frown at the three of them in response. This is what we are going to do, he concluded, nodding to himself. Mabui, prepare a messenger hawk. Mabui groaned as she pinched the bridge of her nose. Fine. I will, but don't come crying to me when you get your arm ripped off or something by Madara version 2.0, she sighed out as she began to walk away. A rolled his eyes in response to her overreaction. This would work, it would show the world that they weren't just bowing to the whims of Konoha or its allies and was willing to stand against them if needed. I stared at the missive in my hand. I must be going crazy, I said tonelessly, looking to Hayashi and Tsum almost beseechingly. Ami going crazy? Tsum chuckled in response as she gave me a feral grin. Afraid not, the Raikage is indeed calling you out for a duel, she informed gleefully, Hayashi sighing from his position next to her. I think I understand where he is coming from, he informed me bluntly. He wants to save face by fighting you. I can see that, but, really? I was still in disbelief about this. S-rank shinobi were some of the strongest weapons in a hidden village's arsenal. Kumogakure, despite their focus on strength above all else, possessed exactly 3 S-rank shinobi at any given time, those people being the Raikage himself, as well as the 2 Jinchuriki of the 2 Bijou they possessed. Never in its almost a century's worth of history had Kumogakure ever possessed more than 3 S-rank shinobi at once. I had temporarily negated the possibility that Yujito and I could use Matabi for an entire month, reducing them to 2, and now Unrulia wanted to fight me. Battles between S-rank shinobi were never small-scale, nor were they fought at the drop of a hat or without reason. No one walked away from a battle with another S-rank without injury. My battle with Kisame Hashigaki was proof enough of that. If he lost, he would almost certainly be out of commission for at least as long as Yujito's Bijou powers were, possibly longer. Pinching the bridge of my nose, I let out a breath in irritation. I really can't say no, can I? Not without losing face to our new allies, no. Hayashi replied. Not to mention, A will likely see it as a sign of weakness on your part and make him think he can push you around. Tsum added. I let out a sigh in response. Did he say where he wanted to hold this fight of his? I questioned. Not only were injuries guaranteed, but we would reshape the geography in our fight. Where we fought would be very important to prevent anything important from being destroyed, like dams, towns, villages, small mountains, even. He's leaving it up to us, Hayashi informed with a small frown. A concession to you as he is the challenger. There is a large unused island to the south of the Land of Lightning, correct? I questioned, recalling my lessons in geography. We can have our little duel there. I shall have the message be sent, Hayashi promised. Do you have a strategy in mind for the fight? I frowned in consideration, running through what I knew of the Raikage. He isn't a complete idiot, I said after a moment. But he is a man who often relies on a straightforward assault, a blitzkrieg if you will, to win his fights. With his lightning release chakra mode, he is usually faster, stronger and has better reflexes than any of his opponents. He's a nin taijutsu user, who specializes in hitting the enemy where it hurts before they can even react. For this fight, I should be able to win without relying on my Menjikyu, but if push comes to shove, I'll use them. Just remember not to throw around too many S-rank jutsu. Tsum said with a snort. We want him beaten and humbled ever so slightly, not a bloody mess. I think I can manage that. I replied dryly. But if he forces my hand? I trailed off with a shrug. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to use the pretext of a duel to assassinate someone. Well, just make sure the nearby islands don't regret his decision, Hayashi commented. I flushed a bit in response. Nearly make one volcano with your husband and no one ever lets you hear the end of it. You nearly made a volcano? My advisors questioned in me unison. A groan escaped my lips as I placed my face into my hands. Oh God, I muttered to myself. I was never going to hear the end of it. So, you go on a hunt for Orochimaru, crash a meeting of all the strongest shinobi outside of the great nations, with the Raikage present, and you didn't bring me along? Rashi questioned me, a smirk playing on his face as we shared a chuckle. Had I known that the snake would be in a meeting with A and S-rank shinobi, I would have brought you along. I informed my ever-so-amused husband. I swear that he is just as slippery as a snake though, the bastard managed to leave during the single minute that I had to look away from him to quell the nibby and stare down A. One day, I am going to corner him, and then. I made a violent ripping gesture with one hand. Rashi snorted in response as he leaned back into the couch we were sitting on. Naruto-kun off on his training trip with Jiraiya-sama, Madoka-chan was with my mother, and Sasuke-kun was with Hiruzen-sama. I think there are more than a few people within and without Konoha who would be more than happy to help you with that, he teased me lightly. I rolled my eyes in response. Considering what I ended up disrupting, it was a good thing I didn't wait, I told him lightly, laying down so that my head was in his lap. He was trying to get all the minor countries and Kumo allied against us. Rashi hummed in response, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, that would have been a disaster, he commented. It would have been a disaster. Although the minor countries were by no means able to stand up to Konoha on a one-on-one basis, if they'd allied together and had Kumogakure backing them up, it would have taken a lot of blood and death to put them down, even with IWA, Suna and Kiri on our side. By the time the last sword was sheathed at the end of the theoretical Fourth Great Shinobi War, the casualties on both sides would have been appalling, something Orochimaru and that hollow bastard Kabuto would have no doubt taken advantage of to gather up DNA samples of powerful deceased shinobi, as well as grab bodies belonging to rare bloodline limit wielders. I had no desire to fight in another war unless it was against that bastard Madara. Eventually, I would have to do something decidedly permanent about Kabuto Yakushi, because I had little desire to see the bastard resurrecting famous shinobi as he had done in the original timeline. In order to prevent someone from doing that to me, I had placed it in my will that my corpse and any samples of my DNA were to be burned into ashes upon my death. I'm going to up Kabuto's status in the bingo book. I told my husband. He's Orochimaru's right-hand man and likely knows a great deal of the forbidden jutsu that the snake does. Add into that his attempt to kidnap our daughter and I want him dead and buried yesterday. Rashi growled at the memory of being told by Han of the attempted kidnapping. It had taken him quite some time to calm down after that. I let out a sigh as I closed my eyes and adjusted my position a bit to get more comfortable as I relaxed against Rashi. And now you have to duel the Raikage, Rashi commented with a contemplative look at me. Yup, you're coming along with me, I said, opening a single eye to meet his gaze with a bit of a smirk. You and Kakashi will be acting as my bodyguards for this. You've really come around since I forced you two to stop acting like genin fresh out of the academy, he commented. I snorted. I won't deny that we've set most of our differences aside, but we'll never be anything more than comrades in arms. There's too much resentment between us. Better than almost using A-rank jutsu at point-blank range, dear. Rashi pointed out blandly. Point. I conceded, wincing at the memory of us almost doing exactly that. Rashi chuckled slightly. You always did have a temper issue, he commented, smirking at me. Remember our vacation? I flushed in embarrassment at the reminder. It had been one of the few chances we had as a family to take a trip together, and we ended up going to the land of the moon to visit the beach. We ended up getting accosted by a group of missing ninja bounty hunters who thought they would be able to claim my bounty. Idiots. The end result had been, well, catastrophic for a neighboring island after I was finished with the missing ninja. I was finally able to relax, I pouted in response to his teasing. You know how long I had been waiting to get out of Konoha and onto a beach. Rashi chuckled in response, running a hand through my hair. I know, still amusing, however, he told me. Letting out a sigh, I allowed myself to relax against my husband. Fine, I breathed out. I'll keep my temper in check against the Raikage. Rashi chuckled in response. Thank you, he replied, winking at me in response. I rolled my eyes at him. Whatever, I smirked back at him, causing the two of us to laugh in response. I let out a sigh as I looked out at the island that I was going to be dueling the Raikage. The island was fairly barren, mostly rocks and coral outcropping from the ocean with sparse vegetation dotted here and there, stubbornly clinging to life in spite of their location. All around us were a number of other seafaring vessels, each with a number of shinobi from different villages, both recent allies and non-allies, all of them looking to observe the battle between myself and A. I glanced back at Rashi and Kakashi who were scanning the area. I'm heading out now, I told the pair of them, getting nods from the pair as the mist shinobi manning our vessel continued with their tasks. Pulling out a tri-pronged kunai, I hurled it into the air, the metal glinting in the sun, drawing the other shinobi's attention as the kunai thunked into the rock of the island. A quick flash later and I was pulling the kunai out of the ground as I turned my gaze to the Raikage's vessel. The dark-skinned man was glowering at me as he took in my appearance before a shroud of lightning surrounded him as, with the shake of passing thunder, he landed on the island. I didn't say anything to him as I drew out my kodachi and held it at the ready, my Sharingan, spinning to life as the two of us watched each other for any signs of an opening, the Raikage keeping his gaze locked on my chest to keep his eyes away from my Sharingan. There were a few more moments of silence as we continued to try to stare each other down before I made the first move, launching a brace of tri-pronged kunai at A. The Raikage blasted himself out of the way, the ground exploding as his lightning-shrouded body hurled itself at me. Darui hummed as he watched the initial clash between the two Kages on the island. So, what do you think is going to happen, B? He questioned the rapper next to him in a bored tone of voice. Is Asama going to crush her like he said? Fool, you fool, crush a Kage. That ain't savvy. B rhymed as he shook his head. And just a Kage she ain't not. Darui grunted in response, even if it sounded stupid, it was true. Iriko Uchiha was a fabled god of shinobi, as well as being the Hokage. Fair, he conceded as the Raikage moved himself out of the way of Yuriko's glowing sword, no doubt her signature and infamous sword scalpel technique. He remembered the autopsy reports from the aftermath of her usage of that technique during the war, and it was not a technique to be trifled with. Check it, they be almost done testing each other, be informed as the pair separated. Shit, Darui groaned in response. It was troubling just keeping up with them as they were right now, and this was just them testing each other. A loud crack was heard as the Hokage vanished from sight, the Raikage managing to bring his vambraces up to stop her sword from removing one of his arms as his chakra shroud kept her scalpel at bay. Damn, don't think I've seen anyone move like that without any chakra shroud before, Darui muttered as the Raikage tried to stab through her chest with his Hell Stab technique, the four-finger Nukite version, only for his hand to pass through nothing as she blurred out of the way. Yo, she be pumping some mad chakra through her legs for that, bro, B commented, reaffirming that for all his posturing and rapping, he was still a cunning and highly observant shinobi. Darui grunted in response. Dangerous, but she is a medic at her core, she could probably fix herself up before any of us even noticed it hurt her, he commented with narrowed eyes as the two traded a couple more passes. Damn, she's not even concerned with his chakra shroud. True enough, the Raikage was forced to roll out of the way as Yuriko's sword suddenly extended forward, mid-stab that he was leaning back out of the way, only for the sword to suddenly retract as she moved it to cut into his shoulder, getting his arm guard in the way once again. It'll be the first blow that decides this thing, yo, B noted. Should that sword of hers cut into him, he'll be taking a lot of damage. Darui grunted in agreement. She hasn't even pulled out the evolved Sharingan that she was reported to have. Is she mocking Asama? He growled angrily. Nah, that lady knows better than to do that, she be playing a long game, B said with a nod to himself. Win with that freaky eye, she be losing a pie, WIRD. What? Darui asked blankly. Look, she can win with the evolved Sharingan, but it'll make people lose respect for her. B finally broke out of his rap speech as he got serious. They'll say back in Kyumo that she only won because of it, not her own personal strength. If she wins without using it though. Oh. Darui replied, his eyes widening slightly as he considered the information. That makes sense, yeah. Dang right it does, fool, you fool, B grunted as he continued to watch the fight. Better not blink, the real show is about to start. Darui raised an eyebrow at B before looking at the two as they squared off again. Their pause was broken by Yuriko spitting out a massive fireball at A only for the Raikage to intercept it with a single finger as he started to use his one-finger Nukite, dispersing the fireball with ease as he charged at Yuriko, who leant herself back at a full 90-degree angle to dodge the strongest form of the Hell Stab technique, a chakra-covered foot coming up in an attempt to kick the Raikage's back. The large man moved out of the way of the blow as Yuriko continued her attacks in a handstand, both of her feet covered in chakra as she attempted to smash her feet into A. Each blow blocked by the arm guard right before he narrowly got out of the way of her sword as she spun herself back up to her feet with a massive slash that would have cut straight across his face had he not moved at that moment. As she spun in the air, Darui's eyes widened as he spotted her forming several one-handed seals. What in the world? She can form seals while moving like that, he questioned in shock. It was a well-known and accepted fact that the best ninjutsu specialists could form hand seals while moving, for obvious reasons, while the masters could do so one-handed, but it was a known fact that the faster one moved, the more erratic or jerky movements, the more likely you were to mess up the seals. Taking those facts into account, the fact that she was able to form a complex formula like the one Darui spotted her using, put her in the highest tier of ninjutsu specialists, and she was a medical specialist. Fire release, sun flare. Yuriko shouted as she landed on her feet, her unoccupied hand in a tiger seal as the air surrounding her burst into flames that whipped out at the Raikage. A growled in response as he lashed out with his one finger, cutting through the flames as he gritted his teeth, the heat obviously affecting him, even with his chakra shroud protecting him from the worst of the effects. Those be some mad skills she be laying down, B said, a slight frown on his face. Bro might be outclassed here. Darui frowned in response. But, if he can keep her in close quarters, won't that give him a chance, he questioned. I mean, yeah, her sword skills are great, but overall, isn't her weakness close quarters? Fight a Mednin up close. That's suicide. B shook his head. I'll be surprised if that's what my bro decides. Darui winced at the reminder. He's been blocking her sword pretty well, he countered. Isn't that how she mostly uses her scalpels? Even if she used her hands, his shroud would make it hard for her to lay a hand on him. Not so, B denied. Basic strength scalpels she's been using, she can always overpower them with more chakra. Darui grimaced in response, not having considered that as the two clashed again, managing to overpower her long enough for her to lose her grip on her kodachi, the blade spinning away onto the other side of the island. Hey, he managed to get her sword away, Darui noted hopefully. Yo, check it, she be doing something weird, B noted as Yuriko began to form a ball of chakra in her hand. Yo, that be that flashing boy's technique. B shouted in surprise at the sphere of chakra. Flashing boys, wait, the yellow flashes. Darui shouted as he looked at the sphere that began to shudder and shift. It doesn't like she can control it well. No ya fool, she be changing it, B noted as the sphere shifted and elongated into a sword comprised of swirling blue chakra, the exact same shade as her chakra scalpel. That be a mite bit of a dangerous thing there. Rasengan, Yuriko announced calmly as she held the sword easily in her hand. Might not be completely obvious, but, it's the Rasengan and the chakra scalpel, combined into a singular jutsu. A mite bit dangerous. Try absolutely insanely dangerous. Darui shouted back at B with wide eyes. B nodded numbly in response, he remembered getting hit by the original technique, and that thing had hurt. This however, this would just straight up kill a man. Bro better realize the danger of that, B said in a low tone. Even his mighty shroud won't help him with that. And it seemed it had as the two began to dart across the island, keeping out of reach of the chakra blade as it cut through his shroud in several places, narrowly avoiding a cut or nick that would spell the end. The Raikage bellowed out a victorious roar as it seemed like Yuriko overextended herself, driving a punch forward that would surely take her out of the fight, only for his first to pass through nothing at all as she vanished with a flash of light as she reappeared behind him with her Rasengan held to his throat. This is over, Yuriko announced in a cold tone as A froze. Silence descended into the area as every shinobi held their breath, waiting to hear the Raikage's response to my declaration. I was on a hair's edge, waiting for him to attempt to attack me as I held the Rasengan to his neck. I tensed further when he shifted a bit, his head turning to meet my gaze for several moments. Finally a sigh escaped the Raikage's lips. I surrender, he called out, loud enough for others to hear him. He then lowered his voice as I dismissed the Rasengan. You certainly are powerful like the rumors say. I am only as strong as I need to be to fulfill my duty as Hokage. Nothing more, and nothing less, A-san. I snorted in response to my statement, standing as he did so. No one gets that strong just for duty, he replied to me, rolling his shoulders, feeling out the small injuries he accrued during our duel. But, either way, you have certainly proven yourself, so, Kumogakure will be joining your alliance. I nodded, blinking as my Sharingan faded back into my coal-black eyes. I look forward to working with you in the future, I told him honestly as I held out a hand for him to shake. I hummed in response, reaching out to take my hand into his own. As do I, he said formally as we shook hands. Hopefully, this is the start of something new. I smirked in response. A-san, we are on the cusp of something amazing, I assured him calmly. This is only the groundwork for the next generation to take and build upon. Hage-man blinked at me as he met my gaze, his eyes widening slightly. So, that what my father meant by the insanity of the Uchiha, he murmured, getting a raised eyebrow from me in response. No matter how insane it seems, you all still strive for that goal. I raised my eyebrow at the Raikage before me in response. Is it really insane? I questioned in response. Is it really insane to try to leave behind something that will help those who follow me? I shook his head in response. Not quite what I meant, don't worry about it, he said, waving it off. We should head back to our ships before anyone gets any bright ideas, I will send a hawk about the official signing. I nodded in acceptance, smirking a bit at him as we separated and headed back to our boats. Time to return, I announced to my escorts. We have to prepare for a treaty signing. The crew on the ship let out a short cheer in response before we set ourselves for our return back to Konoha. End chapter. Yuriko's stats name, Yuriko level, 105 EXP, 39, 582/700 000 age, 23 gender, female title, Godame Hokage, plus 100% reputation with allied shinobi, command of Konohagakure shinobi, you can gain 25% of experience given out for missions completed by loyal shinobi, secondary title, God of Shinobi, plus 50% to all stats plus 100% reputation with all allied shinobi plus 10% damage with all ninja arts. Skill, Aura of Absolute Command, active, fated title, Fate Changer, plus 100% to all stats. Stats HP, 20,025 CP, 95,800 STR, 120, 300, INT, 160, 400, DX, 200, 500, VIT, 120, 300, WS, 160, 400, LUK, 60, 150, Rio, 342,761,998. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.